Right there. Look at that right there.
Look at that head shake, man.
Oh, man. That's what we came up here for.
We are rolling. All right. Waterloo, man. Hey, thanks for coming in, Toby.
Thank you. That's exciting to get here, you know. Obviously live in Brainerd, and you and I have shared some time and fellowship, and, you know, I've seen your ugly mug on TV and the rest of the boys, and I live just down the road from Al.
Yeah.
But I've never really been back here where the magic happens, as they say, right?
So, Toby Kvalevog, a friend of mine, guide, a number of things. Recently, songwriter, as I've been getting texts too. But why don't you give us a little a background, Toby, on who you are, what you do?
Yeah, so Toby Kvalevog, I'm originally from Bemidji, Minnesota, home of Paul Bunyan. You know, that's kind of a thing with Brainerd and Bemidji, it used to be anyways, where actually was Paul Bunyan from. But I grew up as a sports kid. You know, I'm the younger of two boys. And so being that younger kid that's a competitive freak, which kind of leads into fishing, I got into sports and mainly hockey, and eventually made it off to higher levels of hockey and did some stuff at the University of North Dakota and had an opportunity to represent the United States in a World Juniors, was drafted by the Ottawa Senators. So I guess in a sense I was successful in the hockey world, but that all comes to an end, and the drive to be competitive does not. So certainly started fishing earlier, but the Toby that has created a second income as far as being a fishing guide and a tournament angler, certainly that kind of just sprouted from being a competitive freak. So when hockey got done, I just found a way to start competing in tournaments, did the FLW stuff back when that was a thing.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, you know, grew up watching the PWT and all the videos that were produced from Infish, and you know, that all rolls into this stuff, and certainly got into that and competitive in the walleye world, and then became a school teacher when I was in college. I did actually do some stuff besides play hockey, and education's important, and became a teacher. I teach here in Brainerd, so that's where our connection is, you know, this area, and I've been here for 26, this is my 26th year of teaching 8th grade physical education. So I throw balls at kids for like 9 months and then lures at fish. So that's kind of my deal. But fishing for me was real important. You know, taking kids fishing is so important. We talk about that and getting them out, whether it's our own kids or somebody else. And I get to experience through the guide world as a fishing guide with Leisure Outdoor Adventures. I had the opportunity to fish as a kid on the Mississippi River. It was only a couple blocks from our house. So like everybody that fishes, that experience started somewhere, whether it's off a dock or grandma takes you fishing. And for me, fishing pole and a bike and down to the Mississippi River and just wearing out the rock bass and perch and catching your old grubs and everything else and truly fishing, it's pretty special, you know. That's where it all started for me as far as just angling. And then take a kid fishing, which is a huge deal in Bemidji, probably where it started in Minnesota. I'm not sure where the total history is on that, but you know, the Petersons and the Northland Fishing Tackle and that Bemidji community have a huge event every year. And that was one of those kids. And so, a gentleman by the name of Rob Baumer took me out. He worked at a sporting goods store, and I would ride my bike pretty much every day to go see if I could just, for free, help pick leeches. And he said, you know what, we should go do this. And we did it. And first experience in a boat with technology. He actually had 2D sonar, probably Lowrance flasher, and went over Diamond Point Bar, and he marked a couple of fish. We back trolled over it with a Lindy rig and a couple leeches and caught fish. And I'm like, man, this is it. I got to do this. So probably would have been a better hockey player if I didn't spend my entire summer chasing walleyes or something instead of training like I was supposed to be doing. So that expanded about middle school to Cass Lake for me. I have buddies that live on Cass Lake, and so I'd pretty much spend my entire summer out there. Learned Cass Lake, which is a real special lake to me. It's probably my favorite lake in the state. From that, I just expanded into tournament fishing and then got a job here, and I started guiding with a guide group here, Walleye Dan's Guide Service. Spent about 10 years on that, and an opportunity to start our own. So Leisure Outdoor Adventures, a partner of mine, Jeff Anderson, and I, along with Steve Olson, who's a owner of a hotel group, Leisure Hotels, which has now expanded here to the Brainerd area. Really had a need for people that speak fish, you know, as an amenity to a hotel or a resort. You know, it's an opportunity to have somebody professionally book those and kind of take that off the hands of the people at the front desk. And So we started Leisure Outdoor Adventures.
How long has it been going on? That's been a number of years you guys have been at it now.
Yeah, I think this is year 16.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's just Jeff and I starting with probably 40 trips between the two of us, take a step back from getting trips from the group I was with here in Brainerd. And, we touched 700 trips here a couple of years ago. So during COVID, when Canada shut down, we got real busy. But we just are right between that 650 and 700. A lot of them are on Leech Lake. And we have guides up on Lake Vermilion. Certainly still potential for growth. And I think we have 12 fishing guides now instead of 2. So it's growing. It's trending in the right way. We have a tight-knit group, and as we have guys that get along, it's a family. And it's just so much easier to break down the water when you communicate. And, a lake like Leech Lake, for example, at 112,000 plus acres, it's if there's fish 20 miles away in a different bay, you might not know it unless you got part of your group out there. So when you're on the water trying to get fish on people, it's nice to have a network, and that's truly what a guide service is. A guide group, versus the individual guide.
Yeah, and we get the opportunity. We do that ultimate fish camp every year, and that's a really great opportunity to showcase how well organized that group is. Freed taking the lead on setting everybody up with that, but then just seeing how you and Chuck and the other guys in there work together and seeing that happen. It really is. I mean, it's a first class operation. And to your point on a lake like Leech, we've got the walleye season upon us here. How do you guys go about, is there a strategy when you've got a group of guys? Or, obviously you've got the history, so you're going to have some really good ideas on where fish will go. But can you kind of give us a general breakdown of the lake and how you might tackle that starting early in the spring?
Well, Leech Lake is no different than many lakes in north central Minnesota in that, it's a shiner bite, right? Like the spot-tail shiners are a big forage base that are real available to walleyes post-spawn. The walleyes are spawning, and then they're trying to get the feed bag going right afterwards. They just slide out, and at the same time, the shiners are trying to spawn in the sandgrass and sand flats that are right there adjacent to, or even some of the same areas that the walleyes are in. So it's really a buffet. So you have to think about water temperature, with any lake, but with a lake like Leech Lake, the spawning habitats, and walleyes will spawn all over on Leech Lake, but I always start with the northwest sides of the bays and points if the conditions are perfect, because that's where the water is going to warm the most, right? Like no different than crappie fishing, you're looking for that warmer water. And Leech Lake is pretty special in that it has these fingers that kind of run northeast. So that leads a lot of northwest shorelines. So your Steamboat Bay and Sucker Bay and Portage Bay are just real likely spots to start the entire north end of Leech Lake from Ottertail Point all the way to Portage. There's a lot of north water that's shallow that warms up fast. And so when it comes to opener, those are real common areas to start, because that's where a lot of your shiners will be, and the walleyes are just busting out of those areas or finishing spawn as that's happening. So you can kind of eliminate a lot of like any spot, right? Like 90% of the fish are in 10% of the water. So
sure.
Kind of the west and northwest parts of Leech Lake is where we start, and it's pretty much a shiner bite. So that's a starting point, Jared.
So, well, when I'm thinking about from Ottertail Point up to Waboose Bay as a shoreline, well, that's a huge area. So
for sure, miles.
Yeah, miles. So are you looking for, are things, you mentioned sandgrass, so are you looking for, is there a type of bottom cover that you like that time of year? Is it sand? Is it sandgrass? Are you looking for some of the weeds that are still standing from last year? Are you ever fishing bulrushes or rock? Obviously, on that shoreline, there's all those different habitat types through there.
Yeah, for sure. And so we're talking sand, hard bottom to soft bottom transitions, right? So it could be rubble up next to shore, turning to clean sand. And then a little farther, you get to that 14, 15, 16 foot, it starts to turn a little softer. So we're talking more mud, right? Mm-hmm. So when we talk to the north end of the lake, that's really what it is. It's your rubble up on the shoreline. You're talking your first, 5-6 foot break, and that's kind of a rubble. And as you back out from there, it's more of a sand. And then right around that 10 foot, you get some boulders that are mixed in on the entire, up by the beach there and east of Ivans. And so that north shore, and it's a good place for the shiners to spawn and be up there, and the walleyes are spawning up there and moving back, and when there could be in between big points, which walleyes like, but it's just a starting place. But when you talk about the bays now, you're talking about more of a sandgrass and sand So it's a little bit different, and they like the edges. And there's a lot of pockets in sandgrass now on Leech Lake that are, whether it's from rusty crayfish, which we can talk about, and the changes in the lake, but there's less of the cabbage weed and a lot more sandgrass or tar grass, and those, as that is starting to grow, it's pretty short. We're talking May, right? Mother's Day, middle of May. It's pretty short stuff, and any kind of weed on Leech Lake is going to hold, well, temperature too, but it's going to hold bait, whether it's crayfish or shiners or even little perch. It's the start of the biomass chain. Where there's weeds on Leech Lake, there is fish of some sort. And if the walleyes happen to be cruising and are in schools, which they are pretty much schooled up that time of year, it's pretty easy to find them with technology. So sandgrass, shoreline breaks to sandgrass in Sucker Bay, for example, north of Goose Island. And then in the Portage Bay, there's a lot of sandgrass and sand to mud transitions.
It's kind of cool. I mean, we were talking about this, and I spent a lot of time on Leech Lake when I was younger, and there was the beautiful cabbage beds,
Right.
Just amazing weed cover, and then a lot of that cover has disappeared. But you and I have had this conversation that weeds are weeds. So you might go through an area and it's sand, and we're talking sandgrass that time of year. It might only be 4 to 8 inches high.
We're not talking feet. No.
Yeah, right. It's nothing but fish
Clouds.
relate to it.
Yep.
I mean, it's so if you're fishing leech or you had a history of fishing leech and that sandgrass and a lot of those transitions, I mean, I think that's one thing that side imaging has really shown us immensely is that bottom
Sure.
cover. I remember a show you and Freed did with Mikey over here years ago, but when he's flying the drone, you could see, you can clearly see, here's the sandgrass, here's the sand, and weed edges are weed edges. If they're 4 inches tall or they're 8 feet tall, fish tend to relate to those edges.
Travel corridors. Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's cool. And you're right. In a lot of the areas that had the taller broadleaf, your cabbage weed type weeds, still are the areas that have the other weeds, like you said. And so, again, back to the original question, like if somebody's listening and wants to, where do we start? And if you have a history and haven't been there for a while, it's pretty much the same areas, just the weeds have changed. And so you're not going to find by driving and looking with your eyeballs cabbage toppers sticking out of the lake. There are places where it's coming back a little bit, but not that time of year. But you're right, side imaging, it's pretty easy to find any kind of weed, and that sandgrass is pretty important. And when you get some rocks and rubble mixed into it, that's what we're talking about, baby. Come opener, give me that jig and shiner and cast it, and that's probably going to be getting a clunk here and there pretty fast when it comes to Leech Lake and walleyes on opener.
Yeah. You had mentioned the shiner deal, and obviously that's everybody can't wait to get their hands on spot tails.
Right.
And how, literally how important is it for you to have good access to shiners as opposed to having leeches or crawlers or even being able to fish with artificials in that the first couple weeks of the season?
It's important because it's the main forage, and that seems to be what they're looking for. So spot tail shiners are very important, but it's not the catch-all. But as a fishing guide, it's nice to teach somebody one technique. And that time of year with the water temps being colder, you don't have to work the crap out of a shiner. A lot of times just putting on a stand-up jig and letting it fall to the bottom and dragging it, or just giving it a twitch and working it real slow is the ticket. And boy, it's hard to beat that when it comes to getting people that maybe don't have a ton of experience, or even people that do. I know I've just tried many different tactics, and at the end of the day, I'm going back to the jig and shiner because it's what's working. You certainly don't need to, and so case in point, rainbows work great, fatheads work great, but you want to have shiners. So the first thing you're going to load up on is shiners, and when you can't have them, I've used rainbows quite a bit up there, and they work just fine, probably as good. Certainly artificials, paddle tails, plastics, jigging plastics. I don't know about jigging wraps that time of year, but some artificial reaction baits too. I mean, they do work, but it's typically when it's been an early spring and the waters are warmed up a little bit, and we're talking maybe pushing 50 versus low 40s, right?
Right.
There's a big difference. So that's definitely a deal. Last year on Monday of opener, Chuck and I were doing some promotional stuff, and we were catching them on bowers. out in the same places where we caught some fish on jigs and shiners. We used bobbers to catch fish, and fish are fish. They're going to eat. When they're biting, it's probably not going to matter as much. But when it's tough conditions, I believe that a real small jig and a shiner is really hard to beat.
Yeah. So run through like your setup for a jig and a shiner. I mean, are you a braid fluoro guy? Do you like running straight mono, straight fluoro? What's the rod, reel, line?
I'm pretty
Toby's
old school with that. I did try for quite a while on Leech Lake using braid with fluorocarbon with my jig and shiner setup. It's a little bit different now with some of the technologies where you can work baits over fish with forward-facing sonar. But as far as fishing traditionally, a jig and a shiner, slip drifting, just pitching it out and working it back, I've been outfished enough to not change my ways, and I'm just using straight up a Berkeley Sensation line is what I use, 6-pound test reel light, and I just think that it's a more subtle approach. And with mono, I believe I get a little bit more movement out of my jig, just in subtleties. And for me, I've been beat enough by fishing with guys that are really good at pitching jigs and shiners to know that it works for me now, and I'm not changing it.
Yeah, I know mono. Like there still is a time and place for mono, and that to your point, where I've seen mono shine hands down, whatever it is, and how it makes a jig move. Shallow water jig fishing with mono is it's a legit deal.
Well, I just noticed if I don't see it, I'm pretty stubborn in my ways with that. If I don't see it, one, getting out fish, two, literally taking one rod and with braid and fluorocarbon stiffer, right? Mm-hmm. And then having the same jig with the same size minnow side by side where you can visually see just a couple inches below the water. Just there's a shimmy on the mono to that jig, and the minnow's moving a little bit freer, and the fluorocarbon at least maybe it'd be different if I put mono as a leader on a braid line, but the other thing is that with any wind at all, the castability of mono is superior. Like you can really wing it and cast quite a bit farther. I do that a lot with just 1/8-ounce jigs and crawlers. If you get any wind at all, you can cast a jig and a crawler 60, 70 feet on a dime, even with a light one, versus a heavier, braid and fluorocarbon.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned 1/8 ounce, is that kind of your go-to? I mean, obviously wind must play a factor in how heavy of jigs you're fishing out there, and depth and everything.
But I would say, I mean, 1/16, maybe even more so than a quarter. I mean, it's got to be pretty windy on Leech Lake to be using a 1/4 ounce. Nowadays, 1/8 ounce, I would say, is bread and butter. Natural colors, I will use a black. I'll use the lake colors. I love blue and white on that lake. I
thought Leech Lake was only green. I thought that was the color you had.
And gold too.
Yeah,
some guys will say gold, but maybe that's just the thing where maybe it works for me because everybody else is using a different color. But I like the lighter colors. I like natural. I'm not a real crazy person for super bright colors unless it happens to be an orange and there's a crayfish bite going on. Then I'll maybe load up on some of that. But yeah, I've kind of gone full circle on all that, and just a blue and white, and you name the jig, your favorite kind. It seems to work real well. At least that's my first pick.
So if you can catch them jigging in the spring, that's great. Then when are you transitioning to fishing a jig and a crawler versus? And so I'm making this assumption that when you're looking at this live bait spectrum, it's going to be minnow, leech, crawler,
right?
Probably, and obviously there's the rigging aspect of it too. But obviously lately, fishing with the slip cork in a leech has been one of the most dominant techniques in walleye fishing. And when do you make that transition, or do you see it happen?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. The jig and shiner thing, we're shiner heavy, and I would say it's only a week, maybe two.
Really?
Yeah. By the second weekend, I'm pulling a lot of leeches. Also, same time of the year, you start seeing fish with those little leeches or whatever bugs in their mouth and their teeth, and it kind of tells you they're rooting around, right? Looking for whatever little snacks they're looking for. But leeches, I would say, would be the next item, and how we're deploying or how we're fishing those is a little bit different. I'm still a long line rigger, especially with clients. It's easy. if there's any wind or current, we get the surface to break up at all, and you can still pull live bait rigs around, and leeches are for sure the first thing that's going on those, along with bobbers. So you're right, bobbers and leeches can be part of this conversation for the entire year opener until you can't get leeches anymore. Bobbers and leeches work. Leeches catch fish. Dusty Minky, buddy of ours, always said that leeches are an after dinner mint for walleyes. Right, that's where I heard it first. At least I'm sure somebody else told him, but it makes a lot of sense, and it's an easy, and it's not big leeches. The jumbos are, if you're straight up Lindy rigging and you're looking for big walleyes, like that's where the jumbo leeches, so that's where they work well. But the bobber deal, it's small, like just bigger than panfish size leeches. That's really what's working for all size walleyes, but for live bait rigging, I'm talking mediums to maybe larges, but not. You don't need the cow tongues, as my dad calls them. Yeah. Just get some meat out there and drag it. But the key is the speed with that. So back to what are you using and when, it's also how fast are you fishing. So I mentioned opener. A lot of times we're just having jigs on the bottom or dragging them. Well, as the water temp works, heats up. Now we're starting to jig a little faster. Maybe now using more plastics. Maybe adding, reaction baits like jigging rapalas. And then we're adding Lindy rigs to the spectrum. So up until about 60 degrees, it's Lindy rigs and leeches, and for me, it's jig and shiners. It's also Lindy rigs and red tails if you're looking for a bigger bite. A red-tailed chub is a super lively river minnow that's caught here and native to central Minnesota, and it's real popular in the Brainerd Lakes area. Red tails and the Guide Coalition and the Nisswa Guide Lakes forever. It's been red tails and still today on some of these lakes. And they work real well. And this is kind of a tournament thing. From back in trying to win tournaments, you can typically catch a bigger fish, when you're using bigger minnows, right? Big fish eat big things. So red-tailed chubs can be 4 to 7 inches. Creek chubs can be up to 10 inches, and these big walleyes will eat them. And that's just a bigger, again, these fish are really, really hungry late May to early June. So that transition right there is kind of where that water temp creeps up to that 60 degree consistently. And so that's where those transitions then. So we had jigs and shiners in that 40 degree water temperature. Mid 50s, we're talking leeches and shiners. And now we're pushing 60. Now is when the night crawler comes in. And it's probably my favorite bite there is. Like night crawlers, I love using night crawlers. It's simple. They're fairly low, cheap. Who knows how these Canadian crawlers will come across now with the tariff game or whatever's going on. But crawlers in general are cheap. They're heavily, widely accessible. And they're such a fun bite because a walleye will absolutely inhale a night crawler, and it just loads up, and you get to do your favorite thing, and that's set a hook, right? Mm-hmm. And with long line, then you get a good little battle off of it because it's 60 feet away when you set the hook. So minnows early, switching more to the red-tailed chub game, leeches, and then night crawlers around 60, and right around 62. 60 also, which could be 62. That's when people would pull spinners typically, mm-hmm. But that's a game that I've kind of put away because with the changing conditions on Leech Lake, Jer, for me, I've never long line spinners. That's where I do a Lindy rig, and so your typical spinners for me is a 45 degree angle below the boat, and the walleyes are in 10 to 12 feet of water, and it's so hard to catch fish that close to the boat in Leech Lake now, mm-hmm. which maybe that's something we want to talk about, which is why bobber fishing has become such a thing, or casting jig wraps, or casting Lindy rigs, or anything that I use on a typical year becomes so important. You mentioned Lund Camp earlier. Last year we wanted to try. So our Lund Camp is something about, it's truly what it is. It's educational camp for people of all ages, and we're trying to teach how to fish walleyes or muskies or whatever it is, and usually I'm talking walleyes more than not. So, but spinners certainly work in a lot of states and a lot of areas. And so we tried to pull spinners, and I like to use smile blades, the old smile blade as a spinner on Leech Lake. Custom make them, make me a little bit longer leader, but you can pull them around, and typically they work. And with side imaging and forward-facing sonar, you can see where the schools are, so you can line your pass up and you can go. And we pulled spinners for about an hour, and there was hundreds and hundreds of walleyes around us at all times, and I saw one fish on 2D sonar, and that's where our baits were, right? So it's just so hard to do it. So spinners are a little bit of for me anyways, in that depth range of June when I typically would do it, doesn't really work. There's some deeper bites too in that same time frame out off a Stony Point. There's like 18 to 22 foot sand stuff that you could certainly pull spinners on and it would work, and it does work. I see people doing it, but there's just other ways to get at those fish too.
Yeah, I mean, it is crazy. It seemed like forever you could go out there, and in that time frame that you're talking about, whatever, throwing a 2-ounce bottom bouncer, rip around, and I got our walleyes. But your point, it's been difficult. So that's pretty cool. What you were talking about, casting spinners to them. So kind of dive into that a little bit. What you're talking about,
spinners or the rigs?
Are you throwing rigs or that's the whole thing?
You and I talked about something, but both, yeah. So live bait rigs is. I just mentioned it with crawlers. It's a fun way to fish, and same with red-tailed chubs. A red-tailed chub, they're so lively that right before they get bit, they usually go crazy, and they're just your line's just wiggling like nuts. And with these rods nowadays, and maybe braid, you can feel it, and a bite's coming, and then whack, you get a bite, and feed it a little bit of line and set the hook. It's fun, but you can't necessarily go over all the fish that are around you. And one of the things with side imaging and forward-facing sonar, but side imaging particularly, you're driving along, and with spot lock, you hit the brakes when you see a school of fish, and you can pitch a live bait rig past the fish and drag it through them. So really, we're talking like a Carolina rig, right?
Sure, yeah.
Bass fishing world, and but it's got live bait on it, and it's not something that a lot of people are doing, and they probably should, because I can tell you
that's a good secret right there, man. You're giving it all up.
I can tell you that it works, and there's a couple of keys to it that maybe I won't give it all away for the tournament anglers out there. But if you just play with like anything, when you work at it a little bit and learn the technique, it's pretty deadly, and it works great with leeches. It works great with red-tailed chubs, and it certainly works with night crawlers too. So anything that would work on a typical Lindy rig fashion works when you're casting them. The key is you got to shorten it up a little bit, because it's real hard to cast a 6-7 foot leader. Mm-hmm. You seem to catch more seagulls than you do fish when that happens. It's just things separate, and especially with minnows. But that's a deal. But now with the search baits that are out there, different companies have them. It's a spinner on a jig, mm-hmm. right? And that's kind of what's behind that. It started at Green Bay with the different brands that are out there, the Great Lakes, where it's forever been all tournaments were won either pulling crankbaits or pulling spinners behind boards. And now people are catching fish, casting to them with forward-facing sonar, and with a search bait like that, it's a weighted jig with a blade on it. It's a spinner, and you can cast it right through a school of fish and watch the fish come up and eat it.
Sure.
So it's certainly something I got to help design a jig that's going to be coming out here new this year. That's same concept. It's a tungsten jig, which you can see with forward-facing sonar. But my favorite spinner that I alluded to was a smile blade. So the jig that I helped design for Mission Tackle has a plastic blade on it. It's only it's a 1/8 ounce or 1/4 ounce jig, which is real important for a lake like Leech Lake or Winnie or Cass, where these fish are in 6 to 10 feet of water, super spooky, and you have to be able to fish it real finesse orientated. And which is why a smile blade works so well here versus big Colorado blades on Lake Erie. Like, it's just a different deal. So you can cast live bait rigs and you can cast spinners as well. Both kind of cool with the side imaging technologies that are out there.
Yeah, and Leech has gotten clear, right? I mean, I'm assuming there's a number of reasons why the fish are spookier. Obviously, they're getting some pressure, but I mean, the lake has changed dramatically in terms of visibility on that lake. And I mean, it used to really green up in the summer, and it still can get turbid if you've got some wind, but it's not. It's not like it used to be.
And I guess one of the benefits of being older is you get to see how that all develops, right? And certainly 20 years ago, we weren't talking about zebra mussels, not specifically on Leech Lake. It kind of just creeped its way up, and Leech Lake has always been a fairly clear lake, but not in the same sense as like a Cass Lake. It's fairly normal color waters in Leech Lake, but in my opinion, it's kind of a combination. Obviously, the water's clear. I don't know what the DNR surveys are the last time they checked, but it's significantly clearer. And the zebra mussels have been in there. How long has it been now? 5-6 years?
Not that long, really.
Yeah,
I'm thinking
we're talking 3 years with mature ones, and it's made a big difference. as far as clarity goes. And you really notice it when you get to some of the reefs and the shallow reefs on the main lake, where you couldn't see the rocks before in 8 feet of water necessarily in the bottom, except for clear days. And now it looks like it's 3 feet of water, like it's clear. And then we have sonars that don't just bounce up and down from your boat anymore. Now you have side imaging and 360 and forward-facing sonar. And as a guide, I really notice the pressure and how fish are learning as fast as we're adapting with technology to just kind of skirt around those. And we have to get real creative with how we fish as anglers, and potentially, again, a history of Leech Lake with the crash and the amount of stocking that was put into Leech Lake. I mean, really 20 years ago to 15 years ago was probably the highlight of the numbers of fish that were in there, right? So there was truly a lot of walleyes in there, and it's probably more of a natural number of fish that are in there now. I guess I don't know past 20 years ago, but with the clarity, maybe less fish than 20 years ago. The water's certainly clearer, and they certainly seem to be spooky from pressure or just their environment. We don't know for sure it's the technology, but they can certainly see farther, and I'm guessing they can feel better too with less particles in the water. The wind on Leech Lake has always been gold, and it still is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, for those of you who haven't fished Leech, you want to have wind, a manageable amount of wind, not huge wind where you can't stand up in the boat. But yeah, and then the other thing too. Well, it does look like there's at least one really good year class coming up in there, and then they're going to stock it again this spring. So the future does look good. And then in terms of food, like there's a lot of food in the lake. Like there's a lot of perch in there right now, but the rusty crayfish. I take my kids out on the 4th of July. We always trap rusties, and we do a big crayfish boil. And I'm not kidding you. You can set a trap right out in front of the axis in 3 feet of water. And this year I just staggered some. I put one in like 18 feet of water in the middle of like nothing, nowhere. And so a boulder pile produces, a weed bed produces, shoreline produces. It's like there is equal distribution of these things everywhere. It's like the bottom of Leech Lake is covered with food. Are you seeing a lot of walleyes puking them up? I know when we did the muskies a number of years ago, when we were up there shooting something when they were taking eggs, they were barfing up crayfish, so I'm assuming most fish up there are taking advantage.
So it's certain areas, again, back to we talked about sandgrass, right? And from fishing opener, we talked about opener locations. There's fish in those areas. They're just maybe not as tightly schooled the entire year. So instead of having a school of 20 walleyes, in a small area that you can fish, now they seem to, by August, they seem to be in groups of 2s and 3s. And those bigger fish specifically seem to just stay in those areas. So to answer your question, when we're fishing around sandgrass areas, they seem to have crayfish year-round in their digestive system when we do keep fishing. That being said, I think that, again, back to June, traditionally, forever, they said it's kind of when they molt, the crayfish, they lose their skins. And again, this is coming from older anglers, and I don't know the actual research behind it, and I don't know that there is a lot behind rusty crayfish, but that seems to be a real common time where every walleye, right when crawlers get hot, and that's probably why it's just a good time to use it. They seem to be all eating that, and crayfish of all sizes and shapes, and they seem to be soft, and that's where you get the real orange, scat coming out of the walleyes, I guess, all over your floor of your boat, whatever we want to call that.
Well said, Toby.
Yeah,
well said.
But it's a mess. Yeah. And I don't know. When you boil your crayfish, they probably turn out orange too. So I don't know if that's just the acid of their stomachs or what. But reality is that it's a real popular food item for them. I think that early June time, right up to the 4th of July, they kind of chase them, and then the yearly cycle of Leech Lake, when the Mayfly hatch starts, a lot of the fish, especially the keeper ones, seem to transition into that bug bite. Mm-hmm. But those bigger ones don't necessarily. Once they're locked into their favorite rusty crayfish location, just like you and your kids, that's where they're going back, and that's where they live for pretty much the whole year. Maybe slide in and out a little bit, but you're right. They're not going to eat all the crayfish on Leech Lake. Not right now. They don't. They're definitely losing that battle as far as of walleyes to crayfish population.
And then the perch thing too. Are you seeing a lot of small perch, like food size perch in there? I know it was a good winter for. I mean, Chuck said they did really good.
Yeah, it's amazing and really surprising because as much time as I spend playing in and around the weeds, certainly you come across jumbo perch throughout the year, but at no point did I see the giant schools that they're running into this winter. So, where are those fish at during the summer? Probably a little bit deeper, maybe some mud lines. I know perch like to eat crayfish. When I do catch one and clean one, they typically have Cass Lake's one of those lakes that they always have crayfish in them. So the biomass with crayfish in that lake is so much, so big that it's probably helping with the growth of a lot of species. And I think maybe that's part of it. But yes, as long as I've been on Leech Lake, as long as you find weeds, which is back to the predator-prey relationship, if there's weeds, there's perch. And we're the annoying ones where you stick your jig and crawler off the side of the boat and it's gone in 2 seconds. Yeah, we're talking 3-4 inches.
Yeah.
Absolutely everywhere, almost to the, just like the crayfish. Like if you drop the wrong type of bait down by perch, which is pretty much everywhere in all depths, they're there. And so to me, it seems like there's a ton of perch. And again, maybe there's less walleyes to maybe chew on them a little bit or whatever predators. And the bigger perch obviously are there now. And it's good to see. It keeps the economy good. Why is that now versus the last 15 years? I don't know. Also makes you just wonder about the predator cycle, what's on the lake, when it comes to walleyes and perch. But I don't ice fish, so I can't really give you the details. I just know that they were catching the crap out of them this year, and it certainly looked like a lot of fun. But it's good to see because, it's good to have other options when it comes to fishing as a fishing guide. We have bass, we have pike, we have walleyes, we have muskies, but it's pretty easy to transition from walleyes to perch, without carrying 78 rods in the boat. So,
right.
Yeah, so it's certainly something that's on my radar, and it'll be fun to get into them and maybe stay into them as for just another, I'd much rather have people keep, a handful of perch than a bunch of walleyes too, so, but walleyes are kind of special to me, like muskies are to you, Jer.
Yeah, right. So, well, we're still on the topic. We'll get to keeping fish down the line maybe, but while we're still on the topic of what fish are eating, you're talking about the mayfly hatch, and that is traditionally, if anglers see rafts of floating mayflies, they're like, oh, the bite's done. It's terrible. We missed it, blah, blah, blah. What is your take on that? How do you deal with it? And are you like freaked out that the mayflies are hatching?
No, I tell people that, if I could pick a week, of course you'd have to have a crystal ball, but if I could pick a week late in June to the 4th of July, I would look at my calendar and see when the full moon is and whatever that closest date is to that time frame, because that seems to be when the bulk of that hatch is going on. And all walleyes of all size and all fish in the system seem to be really, really active, predictable, and hungry as long as the hatch is happening, And then it's like a hard stop, hear that needle on the record go across, it's over when the mayfly hatch is done. And then that's, to me, when they say summer fishing and it becomes a little tougher, it's immediately following the mayfly hatch, because we're talking deeper transitions a lot of times, right? So where fish are locating off of the edge of rocks and the mud transitions and wherever the bugs are coming from on the lake, and the fish are stacked up and they're hungry and they just are gorging themselves and they're feeding when they probably don't need to feed. And then all of a sudden the bugs are gone and they have to find something else. So now they're traveling to go back to wherever their crayfish are. A lot of times they're going from the deeper mud transitions to the shallower rock reefs on the main lake and then back to some of those sandgrass patches. And that's where they pretty much stay the rest of the summer. And then it becomes really predictable, Jer. It's just after that. Now, there's so much food that they're not always biting like they are in June, but the walleyes don't seem to move. By the 3rd week of July, they're pretty much setting up camp until September in those areas.
It's cool to see that just the way the systems move on,
The
these
biomass.
the biomass, these big, opportunities for food. And it's like the Ciscos are taking advantage, the walleyes are taking advantage, obviously the perch are taking advantage of it. What are you using do you see anything in particular shining when the flies are coming out?
Well, that's where I still and always did. I like to fish. Personally, that's where I would pull spinners. And so, some of the deeper sand to mud transitions that happen to be around 20 feet, 18 to 22 feet, maybe even deeper in spots on the main lake, their walleyes will pile up on those areas. And a lot of times there's big ones mixed in. So as a guide, I'm always trying to find that bite where I can get some real nice picture taker fish and a couple if they want to take them home too that are a little bit smaller. And that seems to be it. The edge of the rock reefs, the edge of the rock reefs, there's several in the middle of the main lake the edges seem to be that 12 to 14 foot area. And it's kind of goes from a hard bottom to soft, even though there's still boulders there. There too is where a lot of the bugs are coming from because the fish are literally gorging themselves and puking as you catch one. It's nothing but bugs coming out, and it's right along those edges. So yeah, you just key in on those areas and spinners and now bobbers, because if you can't go over them, if it's a flat day, you can catch them with bobbers and a leech, again, that after dinner mint concept, right? Real small leeches are kind of the same size as what a nymph is, of a mayfly or midge or whatever they're called. And they'll eat them.
Yeah, that's cool. So this to me is a really important takeaway because Mike, sorry you're getting looped in here all the time on this stuff here. Mike's behind the camera right now. But anyway, we fishing jumbo leeches, like that is historic. I'm not a super, walleye guy, but it's like, I'm going to go fish leeches, get the jumbo leeches, and it's worked. Right. It's been fine.
Yep.
And I remember Mikey and I were up there and we were using jumbo leeches, and you telling me that, like, no man, like, get the panfish leeches or the smalls or the mediums. Cheaper. Like, you don't need you don't need the big ones. And that was
Yep.
the deal legitimately. So if you are heading up fishing Leech Lake, like, don't think that you have to have the jumbos, right?
Yep. Right. Well, and they're fresh and they're livelier, and just like us, right? We probably had more energy when we were 6 than we do at 50, whatever. That's where I'm at. So, but with the leeches, it's this little snack. So yes, 100%. With the bobber setup deal, it seems to be the small to at the biggest mediums. I mean, a couple 2 inches. That's all you need. And it year round, all sizes, big fish, giant fish, little fish. It's come one, come all. It's really a deal. And that same time of year too, I should say that, we do chase. That's where we start to get the plastics and more the reaction bites. So when the mayfly hatch is happening on one part of the lake, there might be another bite going on somewhere else because the fish don't even know the mayfly hatch is happening. And it's warm enough by then that we're talking mid 60s, 70s. And that's certainly a reaction bite, and those fish will pull off of those mud bites, and they'll be suspended or wherever they're going to be up shallow in the sandgrass, and that's where, and the weeds still quite aren't that summer peak height yet, where you can cast a jig wrap through them and get a reaction bite, and that's a lot of fun, as you know, to be able to do that. But you have to have the right clients, so I don't necessarily do that a lot. Again, as a fishing guide, if we're talking Toby, the fishing guide, or Chuck Hassey, or any of our 12 guides, we're going to put the easiest technique in front of the fish that we can get away with, and if it's not trolling a spinner or a live bait rig, it's pitching a bobber and let it marinate a little bit, and hopefully they go down, and you get the right colors and the right size leeches and the right school of fish. It doesn't take too long.
Well, you guys are good at it. I know you're certainly dialed on that whole program. So what are some of the expectations, or what's the clientele like that you have, with leisure? Are you seeing your guests wanting action? Do they want to keep fish? Are they going for big fish? Or I'm sure there's a variety of all of those things, and then experience levels that you're dealing with.
It really depends on the customer. We have a lot of different variation. We have guides that specialize in taking kids out. We have guys that specialize in groups. We have guides that are really taking that family out for action. And then we have guides, and I would put myself in this category, that I've been doing it long enough that I have mainly 90% of my people are repeat customers who have just kind of made their way from coming, and their first experience with Toby was catching a limit of walleyes to catching a limit of walleyes with 2-3 big giant ones mixed in, to they don't care about keeping fish at all. They just want to go try to catch some big fun ones that they can play with and let go. So we really have a wide variety of customers. But I would say when it comes to kids and families, they're not walleye snobs like I am. You know, they want to get bit, and they want their rods to bend. And so again, that jumbo perch thing, or the panfish we haven't even talked about those, the other panfish, right? But there's a lot of wonderful bluegill fishing and crappie fishing at certain times of the year on Leech Lake, and that's what a lot of people want, is they just want to catch fish, obviously. And sometimes we get stuck on 30-inch walleyes and whatever else as fishermen, but the customers truly just want to go out and have a good day on the water, be taught. You know, we pride ourselves, a lot of us are school teachers in a sense. We really have a curriculum based on education in the boat, and can keep a conversation going. But when it comes to angling, me personally, most of my people are looking to maybe keep 1 or 2 fish, honestly, for one meal that night, and the rest of it is just go catch some big ones.
Yeah, it does seem like that metric has changed
Yeah.
over the years. I guess I don't know that it's true everywhere, but it's probably, the way you guys run your setup. But it isn't necessarily that a successful day is, I got a limit of walleyes, right? Like, of course they're delicious to eat, but it's not like you had a bad day because you caught a 27 and a 28 and a couple 26s, and you only got 3 16-inchers, right? Like,
well, that happens.
Right. Yeah,
And a guy right next to you in the fish cleaning shack will have, a full limit of however many people were in the boat of 17 inches, perfect size to put a knife to, and you've got a couple that are maybe 21 inches, because that's why you could have the low end of the big ones. You could keep a couple, and they're legally right. They have the right to do that, or 1 or 2 little ones, and it just happens. But the experience at the end of the day, it's all about the smiles. And I think we do a really good job of communicating up front what the expectations are. I know when I have a new customer, I make that call right away. And it doesn't necessarily have to be Leech Lake at that set. If they want to meat hunt, I'll talk them into, going to a different lake if that's the deal. Again, I mentioned Cass Lake in August. Cass Lake is just full of jumbo perch, and you can catch all the 15-inch walleyes you want at the same time, and you can really, if you want to harvest some fish for a fry, that's the way to do it. And now Leech Lake, of course, with the jumbos this year and the recruitment of smaller fish, probably getting better too in that sense. But for the most part, it's all that layout. You sell it, right? Like that's you got to really speak fish and be honest with people. And let's go out and try to catch a few fish. Everybody get a few, put them in the box, and see where we'll make a decision at that point, right?
Sure.
So that's kind of the deal. So that's a tough answer, because for me, again, I have people that they'd rather catch 3 fish all day long than catch 30 smaller ones, some of them certainly want the walleyes. They want a limit, and that's important to them too. And it's a reduced limit on Leech Lake, so you can keep 4. And if there's 2 people in the boat, that's 8 walleyes they can have. And a lot of times it doesn't take a full day to do that, so we're off to chase big ones anyways.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, 4 walleyes a person is
plenty.
It's still a lot of walleyes if you're talking 17-inch walleyes. And one thing I want to circle back to, we've kind of gone through a lot of the early summer progression, but you mentioned the panfish on Leech Lake, not just perch, and that early season walleye opener through Memorial Weekend is when the panfish on Leech Lake really get a lot of attention. The Leech Lake does have absolutely gigantic crappies. It's got big bluegills in it, and it's pretty cool. It went to special reg on those fish. They really are special. So I'd encourage people that are going up there to not fill buckets full of these things, because it is a really special big trophy fishery. And how often do you see people taking advantage of that in the spring?
Well, I see people in general fishing a lot. The bays that the crappies will move into, once the word is out, there's certainly a lot of people out angling for panfish, and I would say majority of it's probably crappies. While they're up shallow on their edges of their beds, and then on their beds, and then out. And then after that, I don't see a lot. I don't see, and it becomes tougher, right?
It does, yeah.
And they're probably fairly predictable where they're at, but like other fish, and once they're full, they're not the easiest, especially the bigger ones. They're not that easy to trick, at least for me as a walleye guy. But so yes, when Mother's Day to Father's Day, I would say there is a ton of people fishing crappies and sunnies on Leech Lake. And when you go into a fish cleaning shack, it's at least 50-50, if not more, on the panfish side, like you said, like with crappies, not so much the bluegills, sunfish, but they definitely they definitely get harvested on Leech Lake, and I'm not seeing a lot of the giant ones, which is fine. And you're right. It's nice to have reduced limits, but it's always good to not necessarily have to keep as many as you do, and that's what we do too. We'll go keep one or two of those, go through one or two walleyes, and they have the right to do that. But it's certainly fun to play catch and release.
Yeah, it is. The one panfish you forgot to mention that Leech Lake has a lot of and very large of is rock bass.
Yes.
What can you tell us about the Leech Lake rock bass
They've
program?
saved
Toby?
me several trips. There's some giants. That's probably, of course, everybody says that their lakes are underrated when it comes to rock bass, and I can't tell you how many times in my life I've heard I caught the state record rock bass, but I let it go. But there's some locations on, for the right amount of dollars, Jer, I can take you maybe. There's some cribs located in around the lake, and they seem to load up. And when the fishing gets a little slow, it's about as fun as it gets to take a couple of kids and prop them right over that with just a jig and plastic and watch them waylay on these poor rock bass that have 75 holes in the side of their face by the end of the summer.
Well, that's cool. I actually like rock bass. I think they're really cool fish. And like my son, when I take him out, like of the panfish, like he thinks they're the coolest. We get to see them off the dock, and they're aggressive.
Oh, yeah.
And they got red eyes, and they fight harder than a crappie does. And yeah, I think they're really cool fish personally.
Have you eaten them?
I have, yeah. So this is my take on it, and people will probably think that I'm crazy, but I think rock bass are better than crappies. I mean, sometimes they get furry or they've, loaded up with neascus. But if it's a clean-looking critter, I think the reason they got a bad rap is, one, they've got a really tough hide.
They're hard to clean.
And they've got a really thick rib cage, So, but if you can, when you clean them, like they've got snow white meat, it's firmer than a crappie is. And I think they're good,
Yeah,
So.
no, I have too. I asked if you have. I've eaten them too. And I honestly, white meat fillets of any of our fish, really, like I'm putting Cajun shore lunch on them. Like, is it going to really matter? It's more about tonnage.
Right.
But they are. I mean, they're a panfish. And so cold water, when they're clean and they're not wormy and they don't have all the stuff that may be gross to actually look at. I've had cellulitis in my fingers twice as a fishing guide. That's, you get the bacteria in your open cuts on your hand, because we always have cuts when we're fishing all the time, right? And both times I've blamed it on rock bass, because you get those, whatever you called it, that was a fancy word. I just teach phy ed. So the mucus that's on the side of a ugly looking rock bass, right? You get that in your open cuts.
Not good.
According to the doctor, that's probably where I got my cellulitis.
Really?
And
Okay.
That's a painful deal, but I blame rock bass on that too. They're kind of like the Rodney Dangerfield of fish, right? No respect. That's truly the deal, but they are fun to catch, and I've really not had a single client that has complained for the amount of bites they get when fishing's been tough when we pull up on those spots.
Yeah, that's super cool. Back to kind of the whole team here on Leech, like you're talking about some of those times when, after the Mayfly hatch or earlier in the season. How are you guys organizing and saying like, hey, today I'm going to stay in Walker Bay, so-and-so is running over towards Bear, somebody might be going to Sucker or South Shore, or how do you guys kind of handle
missions?
That? Yeah.
When we have groups, we know who's on the water, and more of the questions is, where are you fishing today? And where they went to and where they're at, and everybody kind of tries their own deal. And with smartphones, not that we want to be on our phone very often, but if you're in a tough situation where you're not catching maybe as many fish, a group text, say, how's it going over there, and are they biting, what's going on, or how are you catching them, and that communications, just knowing that you have other people on the water, that brotherhood that you can reach out, and if you're struggling, and we've all been there, you slide up that way, and not like pile right on top of another guide, and unless they're, it's a lot of times it's groups, right? And that's kind of what they want to do. And so in that case, when let's say it's a corporate group and there's 5-6 boats, we'll spread out to start with and end up in the same spots every time. Right?
Just so there's that camaraderie.
Well, the camaraderie, but then also you're getting everybody on the same opportunities.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a lot of fun when they get within 40 feet of each other and that type of deal. And that's really what the customers want too, right? They want their groups together, and that's the thing. But really, that's every day on the water, whether they know each other or not. A lot of times they'll start in the same area because that was the bite yesterday, and then hey, I'm gonna head up to Portage Bay and give it a whirl, or I'm gonna go over here, and if there's enough time, 8 hours, 4 hours goes really fast on Leech Lake. You maybe have time for 2 spots. If you're traveling at all. But an 8-hour trip, you have time to move around, and it's a big lake, so you can spread out and get around. But yeah, we communicate daily, especially the guys that are on leech all the time, and kind of know what's going on. And when somebody pops in that maybe is coming from Brainerd up to fish with a bigger group, it's really easy to put them in the right direction right away, and they don't have to reach out and ask people that are on Leech Lake. It's just common knowledge within our group. So certainly makes it easier that way.
Yeah, that's cool. And I mean, if you do want to get on fish, it's certainly worth, if you're going to a big body of water like Leech, you're not overly experienced, like it's worth calling Toby Leisure Outdoors. I mean, it does speed the learning process up, and having that experience with somebody who does it every day and just seeing a lot of the nuance. Of course, there's, learning some areas is very big, but it just gives you that confidence to do it.
Right.
Like I don't know how many times I've been on a body of water, and whatever, you just want to learn it yourself, and whatever, you've got a sense of pride that you're going to figure it out. And you talk to somebody, or you see something that they're doing, and a lot of times it's just like you just needed a slight shift in angle to get things,
right,
to everything to click,
spot,
and it makes everything
yep,
different. So I certainly encourage folks to do that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's definitely. If I was to do it, and I just hire a guide if I go to Florida fishing, I'm not renting a boat to go fishing. I'm for another $100, I can get a guide that's going to put me on the fish. Like, there's no question that people that are on the water day in and day out have a leg up, and it is fun to figure it out. Like, that's part of the fun of fishing, is to show up to a new lake and with time figure out a bite. But Leech Lake can be awfully frustrating, especially with the times and how they've changed. So I'd strongly also recommend that if you're going to show up, just a half-day trip with anybody, not just Leisure Outdoor Adventures. There's plenty of guides on the lake, right? Like, that's a deal. Like, show up, do a half-day trip, and get that huge learning curve, taken care of. And along with that, I have a couple trips a year that I fish. I jump in people's boats, a lake owner that has been struggling or maybe has some new technology, side imaging or forward-facing sonar on their boat, and they want to figure out how to use it on their boat, which you can get into a guide's boat and catch fish. But like you said, to truly understand what they're looking at with the map and using their own boat being able to control a boat is a huge deal, right? And we don't talk about that enough. It's all about, technology and what tactic you're doing, but just to be able to keep the boat, whether you're muskie fishing off the weeds or the speed of the boat and the drift. I mean, that's a lot of skill there that you don't even think about, and it's not really talked about. Like, that's a huge deal. It's probably the most important thing. And so yeah, we do trips with people that just go in their boats too, and help them learn their system better.
Yeah, and boat control on Leech, that's such a great point, because it is, and it's overlooked, and we always take it for granted that you're assuming
right,
that there's precise boat control. But when you start talking about whatever 1 to 4 foot waves, like, boat control becomes a lot more difficult, and managing it. There's a point where you can fish into the wind to be precise, and then there's a point when that is a fruitless effort, right? Like, your trolling motor's jumping out of the water, and you're going to have to start to manage your drift at some point in time, right? Or you might be using your big motor, or whatever it takes. So that's a big deal, and like it's also traveling in big water. Like there's an art to being able to ride waves, being able to navigate. You've got the big 219 glass. I actually just saw it this morning. I saw Andy working on it.
Yeah.
But so you can easily travel in relatively big water. I run a smaller tiller, and I might want to go to, I might be leaving Stony Point saying I want to go to Otter Tail, but I'm actually heading towards the south end of Pelican before I start to make my next move up there, right? So it's
unless you have me in the front of the boat, I think
you can shield me,
a little bit, no, 100%. So just operating a boat, right? Like, people, and they're not cheap nowadays.
Man.
So you get the boat and you get the system, and you're on Leech Lake for the first time. It's an important deal to be able to control a boat while fishing, and like you said, take the safe routes around the lake.
Yeah.
And there's shallow spots you probably don't want to drive over too, right?
There is. Yeah. You don't want to hit sub when you're not paying attention. That's for sure. So, and the water's pretty low right now this year. At least it is in the Brainerd Lakes area. And when I drove by Hack, I went through there last night, and that little creek that goes through Hackensack, there was like no water flowing out of Perch. So I'm assuming that Leech is going to be a little bit.
Everything's down.
Yeah, a little bit low. So certainly keep that in mind here. And then One thing I just want to hit on here as we were talking about Leech Lake, we're talking about the walleye opener. If you are heading out for the first time this year, keep in mind that most outboard problems are related to fuel issues, and Seafoam Marine Pro is one of those tools that can help you fix those problems. All right, so here's how to use Seafoam Marine Pro to overcome the most common engine problems. This stuff is really easy to use. You just add it to the fuel. If you remember from chemistry class, like dissolves like. And Seafoam Marine Pro is made from petroleum-based products. You can't add too much of it, it won't harm your engine. So, on a common use, I just like to put 1 ounce per gallon of fuel. But if you're having problems with your motor, add a high concentration, especially to a low tank of fuel. Run the motor with that high concentration of Marine Pro in there, let it sit, then go run it hard again, and you'll flush out those heavy varnish and heavy fuel deposits from the system. Then add fresh fuel to the tank, and you'll be blown away on how simple and easy this is to prevent those rough idles, hard starts, and a ton of other problems that you might have from bad gas or just heavy deposits in your fuel system. One of the things, Toby, we've chatted about over the years, and you're on this technology work group that the DNR has. I'm on that, and then Nate Blazing and whatever a number of us have talked about, and this whole issue with Minnesota doesn't require guides to be licensed.
Yep.
And we were having a discussion about that the other day, and so it keeps coming up, and I would be interested to get your take from a professional guide who runs a business, and let me know what you think the value of something like that is.
I understand where that question comes from, or maybe they ask from the guide community and the non-guide community. If you're a lake owner and you see Toby Kvalevog on the lake daily, your perception is probably that Toby Kvalevog and his clients are taking a lot of walleyes off the lake through being perfectly legal and the right of the anglers that are hiring me as a guide to take them out and put them on their 4-fish limit, right? Mm-hmm. And so they have the right to do that. So our fishing guides taking a lot of walleyes off of lakes like Leech Lake throughout the course of the year. Well, sure, compared to other anglers, they are. So that's, whether we should have a guide license specifically for the purpose of raising revenue to increase stocking, maybe, if that's kind of where I hear it, like maybe we should increase the numbers of walleyes on Leech Lake. Let's charge the guides more because that's, to be putting those walleyes back. You know what? I would be 100% okay with that if I knew that that's where that money was going. There's a lot of questions as to, where does the revenue from license sales go? And I don't have the actual answer for that. And I don't know if they can tell you exactly where every cent goes when you're paying whatever a license is this year. And I know that I just know that there's a lot of license sales that happen just in my boat. I mentioned that we did 700 trips 2 years ago. That's potentially, I know there's some kids in there, but we're talking 500 licenses sold.
It's a lot of licenses, yeah.
What's the revenue there? And and without being a guide, that revenue's not coming from me, So I get it. But it also legitimizes a guide. Like there's people, I consider myself a professional, and I think it's important to be a guide. And, whether you're Coast Guard licensed or if you have to buy a license that covers your boat for people. In Florida, I don't buy a fishing license. I get on the boat with the captain, and my license is under his license, So whatever that looks like, I'd be 100% okay with it. I'm going to be a guide, whether I have to pay $1,000 for a license or $75 for a license. It's going to happen. It's part of the deal, and ultimately that leads into the cost of my trips. That's just the way the business works, right? But again, like there's a lot of license sales that happen. That's just our company. So the amount of fishing guides in the Brainerd Lakes area and the thousands and thousands and thousands of guide trips that happen in Minnesota, and all those license sales are because people are going with fishing guides. That's kind of what we don't talk about.
Yeah.
And so to the other fishing guides who think that we should have one, like I agree. Like it's gonna make it a legitimate deal. If you have to fork up $1,000 and you're kind of wondering if you're going to be a legitimate fishing guide or not, you're probably going to take a hard look at that, if you're going to do that as a profession or not, whatever the value, our price would be. And then to the lake owners, yeah, I'm 100%. If they're going to ask that we pay more for license sales and that money's going to go back into the resource that I'm fishing on, heck yeah. Or let me just sign up for that anyways to put the walleyes back into Leech Lake. I'm 100% okay with that. But if my money's going to whatever is happening in the state that I live in, and I don't know what it is, and it's just another pull from the government off my pocketbook, I just don't know if I like that.
Sure.
So I don't know. Well, I don't know how to, without diving into that farther, I would want to know where that money's going and why they're doing it. And then just remind them that there is a lot of economy. There's a plus to the economy and the license sales, and where that revenue is going is a big thing too.
Yeah, I mean, guiding and tourism are so closely tied together, and as we know, tourism is such an important element of it. So,
Sure, yeah.
On the financial side of it, I've had some discussions that I don't know, whatever the DNR is not going to bring something like this forward. Maybe it would have to be legislated, but it doesn't sound like whatever the fees may be would even process, I think the big missing gap here is, we talk about this all the time, is that it's information. So, having some sense of what is, you guys are the best, most experienced users of the in terms of catching fish. So when you're looking at data, say creel data, you might be going back to your place where you're not going to see a creel clerk,
Sure,
right?
yep.
So what happens to the guy floating around in a 14-foot boat on Leech Lake to compared to what Toby Kvalevog, Chuck Hassey is seeing every day? Like those are the optics on those two experiences are much different, right? So if you're managing a resource and you're looking at the guy in the 14-foot boat, what does that look like compared to a guy that's using the resource every day? So to me, in many regards, if you could have somehow a means of understanding what the guides and the super users are seeing and quantify that, you would have a much better insight to what's really happening on the resource. Because I personally feel that the whatever data maybe get gathered in the means that the agency does it, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's often not reflective of what somebody who's on the water every day is seeing. And so to me, that often creates friction between anglers and the agency. And so having that, having a means of simplifying that or communicating that information better is where I would see tremendous value.
100%, yeah. I mean, it is. The people that are on the lake day in and day out, especially when we come to the summer times of the year, right? There's not as many anglers. You take a snapshot of Leech Lake on Fishing Opener where there's thousands of anglers, and then come back and look at mid-July, late July, after the holidays or, 4th of July is done, and after that it kind of becomes the main lake, at least, except for the Muskie angler, is different. But as far as walleye fishing goes, it's a bit of a ghost town out there in the middle part of the lake and up into Portage Bay and everywhere else. And so, I mean, there's certainly a lot of angling happening at that time. And again, back to the old saying that, less than 10% of the anglers are catching 90% of the fish, right? And that's really what we're talking about here.
It is, yeah. Yeah, and so how we quantify that, I think it's important because, this is something we've talked about on and on and on, is that we've got this issue with Leech Lake muskies right now. And for anybody not listening, what we're talking about is their muskies use deep open water habitat. People have known that they're there for years. They've been caught for a long time. You bring up a lot of really great points about this that I want you to talk through, Toby. But the number of people who are utilizing this resource currently and with forward-facing sonar now, making these fish easier to identify, is really raising a lot of concerns as more and more users are accessing this resource.
Right. Yeah, and so the whole muskie game, you're right. Like you mentioned that the fish have been nomadic, and they've some live there year round, right? Except for spawning. They get out there and they spend most of their open water period out there in deeper water. And there's quite a few fish that are out there for a while after spawn, feeding up or recovering or whatever we want to point that towards, both probably. And then there's a shallow push, right? So forever, as long as I've been on Leech Lake, there's been a trolling bite that happens, and the one that is used a lot is kind of that post-spawn June trolling bite. And in the time that I've been muskie fishing on Leech Lake, I have dabbled in the trolling bite in the different areas. And it is over deeper water or adjacent to, very similar to where the Mayfly hatch is happening during that time. Because why? Because that's where the ciscos are at, right? And those bigger walleyes, and we're talking the bigger walleyes, the muskies. We're talking
there's
the
big walleyes there
There's
too.
bigger
Yeah.
walleyes. Trust me, I got both rods ready at all times. But the muskies are out there feeding on the ciscos as they come up and slurp the bugs that are hatching, right? And so it's just real predictable, and it's a time of year, and there's always been angling pressure there. However, now there seems to be a lot more pressure. And so the topic we're having here, or the conversation we're having right now, and the topic is really about what's fair chase and the angling pressure, and it seems to be a little bit, different sides of this coin as to what the issue is. But the good news is we're talking about it. So there's quite a few problems potentially, right, with catching fish in deep water. You have fish that could be too deep, that maybe travel in a very short amount of time, maybe travel 20 feet to hit a bait up near the surface. And just the way the muskies work, I kind of look at it like myself after a summer of sitting in the boat and drinking beers, maybe too much over the summer, and having too many bacon cheeseburgers and whatever else. I'm not in the best shape come September. Well, muskies that are 50 inches long too are at the end of towards the end of their lives, right? And probably not the most athletic fish anymore, especially when they got 2 or 3 ciscos in them and they got some pounds. And boy, they just struggle to recover. It doesn't matter if we're talking 2 feet of water. If we're talking fish that are out over deep water, muskies after that battle, it's pretty intense. Takes them a while to get back down, and if they travel any distance at all, they have a hard time sometimes to get down, especially those bigger fish. And that seems to be what we're talking about in the open water area. So the way it's happened is, there's been trolling going on, and fishermen, expert muskie fishermen, fishing guides. There's always been, as long as I've been on Leech Lake, there's been boards and guys trolling around different parts of Leech Lake. And now with forward-facing sonar, and myself is included in this, as I learned to use forward-facing sonar for all species to take advantage of technology for my business, for the people that are paying me to do so, and to just stay ahead of the competition. Because that's what it's about when you're trying to put a good experience out there and trying to keep your brand at the top, just taking advantage of the technology. I started chasing muskies with forward-facing sonar, and you know what? It was a lot of fun. It doesn't matter if it's a muskie or it's a crappie. When you have the ability to look at a fish and know that you're fishing a fish, certainly doesn't make them bite all the time. But with that technology, my wife caught a 52-inch muskie on her second cast ever, right. And it's a pretty special night for us. And that was her second fish. I said second cast ever. She got one in her first cast too. That was a small one, but that's crazy.
That's crazy. You're 100%.
That doesn't necessarily happen, or should it happen maybe, but you know what? It got her into fishing. I had a guy that was 86 last year catch his first Minnesota muskie and his biggest muskie ever. He's only caught a handful. There's no way he's casting bucktails all day long. Had a 10-year-old boy, first experience for walleye fishing, and saw a muskie, just out off below the surface where we were fishing for walleyes, and we pulled out a rod, made a cast, and he caught a muskie. So absolutely hooks kids, and it gives an opportunity for a lot of people to, fish with technology, to fish for some of these fish, and including muskies. It's a pretty special deal. So I got hooked on it. It's certainly fun. Well, fast forward, the amount of people still trolling, and other people like me that are trying to put clients on their fish, are certainly considering the variables that we should consider when catching muskies, how deep they are in the water column, what are we casting at. But that's the deal. Like, that's the conversation right now. So now, instead of catching, a muskie here and there, trolling, and it's pretty good out there, and you know that too. Trolling the trench, if it's a good muskie day, you're probably going to get a rip. Trolling. So you might get a bite. You might catch 1 to 3. That's a great day, right? 3 muskies trolling in 4 hours. That's pretty good, really good. But that happens. Like, those are real numbers. Those are pretty common. Well, we have trips now where it's 10 muskies in a day out there, And so in talking to you, we've had a lot of conversations about this, Jer, with the forward-facing deal and just the depth of water that they live in. It's truly fish in a barrel. Like, there's a lot of muskies that are living there during a 3-week window, and there's a lot of people angling for them, whether they're trolling or forward-facing sonar, and they're all catching them. And now with technology and social media, it's just spreading. And now with this conversation, it's really becoming a common conversation. Mm-hmm. So at times last year, there may have been, instead of 1 or 2 boats fishing a 10-mile stretch, there's probably dozens, right? Yeah. And if everybody's catching a fish to 10, we're talking a lot of hooks and a lot of fish, and big fish, and special fish. And so this is what's really got me on the subject is I know what I'm fishing for, and I feel like I'm casting at fish that should be able to survive being caught. But in just recent, I've listened and paid attention to the studies that the hooking mortality of a muskie is way higher than I would have thought. Under good conditions, shallow fish, cold water, certainly the odds are better when it's colder, but just the temperature and a bucktail, and we've all had, if you fish them enough, you've had muskies not make it. Mm-hmm. But just because they swim away doesn't necessarily they're going to make it. So for me, the fact that the numbers are going up, the pure numbers of fish that are being caught, and we're talking a very special number of those muskies too. Like Leech Lake's got quite a few muskies, but how many fish over 48 inches are there? Mm-hmm. And it seems like, and I'm sure they're all over the place, but it seems like they're all having a party for 3 weeks in one area. Mm-hmm. And here we're out there now doing it. So we're, obviously you've been a big part of the conversation. It's important, but it's so important that this conversation happens. And the people that have tested the waters and have done it can really be part of this education, because I truly believe it's a special bite that is not like any other species on the Lake of Leech Lake. Mm-hmm. We're talking a really, like you say, a low density number of fish. There's not that many muskies of that size specifically to start with. And they're in a special area. So the conversation needs to happen, and we need to have new research and understand what happens when fish are caught over deeper water or in deep water, because if people are making bad casts, or I've seen it firsthand. I've had muskies that have expired because my baits trolling are 10 feet below the surface, and they've shot up from 25, 35 feet down and ate it. Again, clear water. These fish can see a long ways and eat it, and those fish have expired. And so the fact that we're angling fish that are over deeper water, if it's going to be allowed, the education has to be there, right? And I know you're working on some things that are real important to help with that process. Once we're doing right now, this is an important piece of this process.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a couple good points. Is that one, like the fish were being caught, and whether they're caught trolling or casting, I think that's debatable on what's better for the fish. But you hit the social media, it's not a secret, right? It's not like one or two people are doing this trolling, or 1 or 2 people are sharpshooting. It's become a real thing. And so, to your point, when you handle fish and these fish, historically have not really been handled. I mean, there's a couple guys running into a fish here or there, and you talk about these encounter rates of, 3 being an awesome event. And obviously more fish were caught than that in a day, but really relatively low encounter rates to now you're seeing these encounter rates really skyrocket, and the users having encounters skyrocket. And so I'm not personally sold on that. There's a means that if I saw a fish that was in 5 feet of water or 5 feet down, that's a good one to cast at versus one that's 30 feet down. Cause you've seen it as have I, that
they move.
A fish can be in 30, it can be in 5, it can be 2. They move around. And so they're probably fine doing that until they get caught in a net. And
that's a huge part of it.
And so it's not, maybe it's barrel trauma, maybe it's the way they're hooked, but it's just, they're big, you're handling them, they're wrapped up in a net, you're cutting hooks, they're, it's it's a lot of stress on the fish. So, in having that conversation, it's like, okay, do you ban a technology do you say no more fishing for muskies? Do you say don't fish in this area?
Right.
So like how do you address that? And if it was a really clear answer, I think everybody would be advocating for the really clear answer, right? And it's not. What seems, I think, pretty clear to both me and you is like there are areas of the lake for certain times of year that we should probably say, hey, cat's out of the bag. Let's maybe not just fish for them in these areas, and that's kind of what we were trying for, and it's kind of it's changed. So right now, probably if you're watching this when you go out on Leech, you'll see signs at the access is just asking people not to target muskies in those deep basins, because if you don't know, the muskies from Leech Lake, the eggs and broodstock are for all of Minnesota's muskie fisheries. So this is a really valuable resource to the entire state, and every fish, of course, is important. And if we screw something up, it's going to take 30 years to get that. And because Leech is an amazing trophy fishery. It really is. And it's not that we're going to lose the muskies are going to go extinct in Leech, but we don't want to lose the quality of the fishery, really. I mean,
quality, not quantity.
Right. And yeah. And so, a cool thing, though, we haven't really talked about this, but Bemidji State University is going to do some work out there this year. So they're going to be putting some telemetry tags. Jeff Arnold Reed's really got this thing organized. We were talking this winter, and he has pushed this thing through. So there's going to be some research going on there with Andy Hafes up at BSU. I don't know all the details of the research project yet. He's outlining that, but we've got funding available. It's going to be user funded, so MinFish is organizing that funding strategy. So you can learn more about that at MinFish. But we do need to figure out what's going on. But in the meantime, this is great. We're doing research, but we'll look at this research paper 3-4 years down the road. Right. Like that's, as you and I know, if you went back 4 years ago, you and I were talking about getting a rip trolling,
right?
Then all of a sudden, like boom, boom. Now the forward-facing thing is happening, and as you learn about this, like you're a student of angling, just like I am. Like you figure this thing out, and you just want to learn. Like I want to get good at this, and then all of a sudden you get good at it, and then you realize what's actually happening, and other people already say, "Whoa, okay." Yep. It's not like you're saying only me do it. It's saying like, "Oh, hey."
Right. Oh, 100%. Yeah. And again, I'm learning through hard knocks, that I know what I've seen in front of my eyes and in the conversation, but it's a technology. And I've told you this privately, like I know forward facing sonar is the one that's right here in front of us right now. And that's a huge leap, right? But technology is technology. And with fishing in general, I mean, what did mapping do back in the day for fishing, right? Like this technology is technology. And I truly believe what you just said is kind of where I'm at is once you understand that you can do a lot of damage without using some education and some common sense when it comes to the fish that are in front of you, right? So back to this forward-facing sonar or side imaging in shallow water when they're in sand, like you can totally target the biggest, most special fish on Leech Lake. You don't have to make a single cast on Leech Lake nowadays unless you see a muskie right there. And that's what people do. They drive until they see them, and I myself included, and cast at them. So now that I'm 50 years old and I have a frontal lobe and I'm able to process the fact that, you know what, this is great for my client, but again, big picture, right? And that's what we're talking about right now, the big picture. Like this is an important resource and these are important fish. What is fair when we're talking to muskies, or any special size fish of any species, right? Big built bluegills, because you can see them in their beds, right? Like that's got to have some common sense and education there. But with the muskie thing, I agree with you. It's technology and what's next, right? Too. And so you asked a question and I didn't know if you were leading to me to answer that, but I'm going to give you my 2 cents. What podcasts are awesome, right? Give my opinion, like what's inside this guy. If it's Toby Kvalevog and we're sitting around here right now, we need to make a decision tomorrow. What are we doing? I would close that bite until after the 4th of July.
Yeah, I know you've been pushing.
Muskies. Yeah. I mean, just muskies in general. Like, okay, we're not going to fish for them. That's the deal. And let's try it on Leech Lake first and see how it works. And but I also understand that forward-facing sonar and open water and trolling. And again, I look at, yes, the number of contacts are a lot less without it, but we're still talking about catching fish over deep water, whether we're trolling or we're casting at them when you can see them. Now that's an ethical issue, but the potential to lose a fish because of they travel is the same, right? Whether you catch one fish or you catch 20 fish, the potential that fish is shooting up at that moment to eat that bait is there. It's reality. So when we're talking open water, I don't know if there's a way to just target that in general, not so much a technology thing. It's just, that's it. But as far as this special bite on June that we're talking about right now, when it's a bit of a massacre when it comes to catching muskies, and I don't mean that in the sense that every fish is dying. It's just a lot of bites. It's the easiest thing to do right now until to buy that window, right? 3-4 years down the line, close it.
Yeah. I know you're not alone in that.
I know there's a lot of, again, the economy doesn't work because people are coming there to muskie fish, and there are people in resorts that bank on that. So I am talking out of one side of my mouth 100%. As the fisheries guy, that would be the way to do it. Now, it wouldn't be fair to the resorts. It wouldn't be fair to the people that have been doing this for years and have been trolling themselves from Portage Bay down to the south end of the lake, whatever they're doing, and catching a few muskies, maybe getting 2 a week or none, and having a good time doing it.
Right.
Wouldn't be fair to them, and it wouldn't be fair to the resort owners that are losing the income on that either. But I'm just saying, as far as that goes in Leech Lake, we have a 10-mile stretch of stuff that we're talking about here that's pretty special, and if that was closed, and or the season in general, because it's a pretty big blanket and it's a big lake, and it'd be really hard to enforce because we have to talk about that. What does a conservation officer do as far as policing that? Well, if it looks like you're muskie fishing and it's June 30th, you're probably going to have a conversation.
Right.
That would be a way to take care of it right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would work, and I don't know if I like it, but I'm just saying that would be a way to certainly put a halt on it so we can not necessarily potentially lose the quality of the fishery that it is right now.
Yeah, and
species.
A lot of this, we're having this conversation because we had a north wind last year when I was leaving Leech Lake Fish Camp.
Yep.
I'm ripping that South Shore heading towards Stony Point. I was heading up towards Walker Narrows. Oh, there's one, there's two dead ones, like, oh boy, you've seen them out there. Yeah. People that like,
and I have every year since I've been out there, and it seems to be that time of year, and I get it, but now we have more incidences.
We do. Right?
So it doesn't, again, back to the trolling thing, and myself personally in experience, we've lost fish because we were trolling over deep water, and they just won't go down. They can't get back over that. And it's not so much they're dying from being down. They're just so tired they can't overcome the air in their swim bladders, right? They just can't get back down.
Yep, they can't get down or whatever.
Stay down.
There's all these stressors that are causing it. So the concept of like an angling or a refuge from angling, does seem to like when we approached this first, it was a seasonal closure, meaning let's have these geographical boundaries,
right?
And then so you've got these, how do you what does that look like? Can it be on a digital map? Can you do buoys? Can you do these things? Why don't you just close it? So you're trying to make these concessions for different users, saying that why can't a guy go throw a bucktail in Sucker Bay, on the 30th of June. Like that's not the issue we're talking about. Where are we taking opportunity away from that person? And the same point, I've got a $100,000 boat and I bought this piece of technology and I want to go fishing for one day and have this encounter. But then, somebody else is out there every single day catching. So there's all these complicated issues that come down to resource allocation and what's the best thing. And the best thing is, I think what anybody cares about is the fish. We want to maintain a quality trophy muskie fishery on Leech Lake, and kind of this conversation we keep having is, both of us having spent a lot of time out there, loving it, going, well, maybe it's just time to pump the brakes on this one.
It is fun.
Yeah,
it's fun, yeah. but and so just to circle back on that, whatever the the signage and the path that it's moving now with the 20-foot recommendation for the lake and to be educated is fine. But again, back to the hooking percentage, it's just what really has caught me. The like, hey, we need to make it. And somebody brought at the group we were just at talking about the fisheries here a weekend ago. Somebody brought up a fact of if you could limit yourself to a single fish a day, right? Then maybe we're not talking about this. If it's only one catch and it's forward facing, because now you're talking the same numbers as the trollers.
Sure.
Right. And so prior to whatever happens as far as the decisions and what we're pushing, that of course is where I will be behind and make sure that we're doing that from a conservation standpoint. But I've already told my clients, and I've shared with you some crazy numbers. I already told them, guys, you're catching 1 muskie this year, and we're walleye fishing. That's it.
That's it.
Maybe we don't catch any, but I want to be. And again, I'm talking to this area and what we were doing. Like, there's no more. We could go trolling and we might catch 1 each, right? Or we can do it this way. And I don't know. Maybe the bite goes away. Maybe fish are learning, right?
Sure.
You don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
But that's the control I have. I can say we are not doing this again. If you want to go to somebody else, go ahead. But we are not doing it. You catch a muskie, we're done. We're walleye fishing. That's it. That's how it's going to happen. And you're like, it's fine, makes sense.
Sure.
And that's where my clients in the conversation I've had. So that firsthand experience, that's what I know I can control. And again, it's back to that in our meeting, our task force group. That's what really stuck with me is just the incidents, number of incidents with. Again, I as a guide can take a look and say, yep, that fish is 5 feet down. We caught one last year that was on the surface.
Yeah,
next to the
told
boat.
me about that.
I mean, that's a safe fish to cast at. It's no different than one that's
Well, probably, but I remember my kid caught a really big one on top of a 4-foot rock on Eagle Lake. It was next to 60 feet of water, but it was on top of the reef, and that thing was bloated, and it was cold, and it was, so.
Yeah.
My point is, you don't know the history of the fish,
Right.
and the fish can
100%.
operate. So,
right. And again, that's back to whether you're trolling or casting. You don't know, right? But the odds of that happening are less if you're only catching 1 versus 10.
That's right. Yep. So it's Kevin Cochran said it best. It's like reducing your footprint. So obviously there's some, we don't want people not to fish for muskie and catch muskies.
100%.
And there's some level of angling pressure that these fish can handle. But this is just also new, and the numbers are just so astounding during certain windows of time that it just doesn't jive with what muskie fishing has historically been, and it's making everyone involved take pause and say, okay, it's time to check.
Not, in the community, it's a unique community, right?
It is.
And I started fishing muskies when I was 12 years old, with a little muskie pole and some Dacron line and 2 bucktails and a high-fin fooler. That's what I caught my first muskie on, just a jerk bait, right? That was it. And what did you do? Stretches the shoreline, right? Understand your depth, and that's it. Just cast.
Yep.
And then over time, you see a few fish, you circle back and start doing it. And that's muskie angling, and that hasn't changed. And most people, that's it. And again, back to technology and maybe the guides and licenses, right? Like back to incidents. We talked about that. Who's catching the most fish? Well, there's some incredible numbers coming off of a lot of lakes, not just Leech Lake. And guys that are dialed, they're pretty dialed in, whether it's walleye fishing, crappie fishing, or muskie fishing. And it's a lot of contact, but it's certainly a lot different. I personally went through my youth doing some muskie fishing, became a walleye snob forever, and then on Leech Lake as year 16, about 8 years into it. So about 8 years ago, I'm like, I need to get back into this game because we really don't have a guy that's fishing on Leech Lake for muskies within our group. So started breaking down the pencil reeds. Well, how many miles of pencil reeds are there?
Oh, geez, yeah. Right.
And that's all it was, casting. It's super fun. And then just like that, you get dialed, right? Yep. Next thing you know, you're catching 2-3 a day, and they're in there, and they're maybe smaller, bigger, all of it. You don't know. It's certainly a fun bite, but that's muskie fishing. That's the way it should be, right? You're just pounding water. Well, again, there's good and bad with technology because now I can take that 8-year-old and my dad's never caught a muskie. You know how cool it'd be to take my dad muskie fishing?
Sure.
And pretty much give him a chance for sure. It'd be super. Now, is it ethical? Like that's what some part of the conversation too, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's a place for it. And I, if we can limit that to the amount of hookups and the hooking percentage, and which ultimately is a lower mortality to the lake, there's probably a place for it. But again, what we're talking about right now is education. And until we know more, doing something, which is you've been a huge part of, and thank you for doing that, to get the ball rolling on the signage, that's going to be a big piece.
Yeah, and education is always going to be a part of it. And again, back to the point, if there's clearly a means that there was, okay, this is the answer, this is the best thing, then we'd be advocating for that. But it's a complicated issue, and there's a lot of people like yourself and other guides and stakeholders who are concerned and love Leech Lake. And as both of us know, Leech Lake is a super special, amazing place in the state of Minnesota, and we've both spent a lot of time there. You a lot more so than me, but I love that place, and it's super cool, and hopefully we can keep it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And your history is before mine. I mean, I grew up in Bemidji, so I was on the other side of it, and I did touch Leech Lake, but I truly started fishing it day in and day out as a fishing guide for the last 16 years. And your buckle fishing there was probably before that.
Yeah,
and you had a different experience when muskie fishing maybe wasn't the deal.
Yeah.
You know, and
Well,
until you figured it out. Yeah, I know, but
right.
It was a little different than it is now.
Yeah, very, very much so. Very much so.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
But anyway, well, Toby, hey, thanks for coming on here. If anybody's looking to go fishing on Leech Lake, Lake Vermilion, Brainerd Lakes area, whatever, leisure outdoor adventures.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add, Toby?
No, and again, we're talking fishing opener, right? It's right here, right now.
Right.
So get yourself, if they're available, some shiner minnows. If not, your biggest minnow you can get, whether it's suckers or rainbows or whatever else. Find that 1/8 ounce blue and white jig. Stand-ups always work really nice, or anything blue and white, jig and a shiner. Monofilament, find some shorelines. If you can use any technology at all, it's important to find yourself a little batch of fish away from the massive crowds.
Sure.
That's so huge on Leech Lake. So thanks for having me very much. Good luck to everybody. But that's my last minute, 2-minute tip, I guess, is to jigs and shiners, blue and white, and find some sand flats away from the boats.
All right. And so before you go, we've got these really cool frescoes. Well, you and your awesome big Leech Lake muskie there. So they're these cool magnetic deals. Put it on this foam board here so you can peel that one off.
Oh, wow.
Stick that on the foam board and your wife is going to be so happy.
You know,
Look at that.
this muskie was actually caught on our anniversary.
Was it really?
Just notice my wife was not in the picture. She was still sleeping up at the camper, and that's such a beautiful, that's my biggest Leech Lake muskie, and that was caught on our anniversary. So I don't know, I'll fit that somewhere between deer heads and fish pitchers or whatever. I'm sure she'll
Perfect,
love
man.
it. But this is very cool. What a great concept.
Yep. And you can replace it whenever you want with another magnet. So cool.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right.